Okay. As you can obviously read, my thesis was an analysis of post-recession regulation reform within the banking industry. To start off with, you need to ask yourself a few things. First, what type of regulation are we talking about here, and why do we need it? The type of regulation is federal regulation, again within the federal government or within the U.S. banking industry. Why? I'm going to give you the 30-second synopsis of how we got into the current recession we're in today, and the reason why we need regulation in the banking industry. It basically goes back to the Clinton administration, where before this time it was actually illegal to invest in the private housing sector. It was found or considered to be immoral to bet on someone's livelihood. But during the Clinton administration, legislation was passed that actually counteracted this. It was aimed at increasing minority housing. They wanted to increase it by 50 million by the year 2010. Once this legislation was passed, people were then able to invest privately in the housing industry. What happened here is realtors then sold what were called subprime mortgages, or very, more or less for lack of a better word, a terrible, terrible mortgage product to people who really didn't know much about them. Millions of these mortgages were sold to primarily poor, uneducated minorities in areas of, well, highly dense minority population. Baltimore was actually the heaviest targeted area. Once these subprime mortgages were sold, the mortgage brokers took their commission up front, and then they basically sold off these mortgages to the giant banks or the big banks, all the ones that we needed to see have the TARP money. Once these banks had these mortgages, what they did was compile them into investment vehicles, which were called CPOs. These CPOs were just more or less collections of millions of subprime mortgages that were then bought off and sold to anyone who was willing to invest in them. The thing that attracted many investors to these CPOs were very high yields in a very short amount of time. They were very high risk investments, and they knew they were high risk investments, but the yield was supposed to be high enough so the risk actually outweighed or wasn't that big of an issue. The problem was these CPOs were backed by entire subprime mortgages. The biggest issue with these subprime mortgages is many of these people, when they first got it, their mortgage payment was $800 a month. And then right from there, a couple months later, it might jump to say $2,800 a month. It was in the fine print and written in languages that these people could not understand, or like wording or phrasing that these people could not understand. And as a result, about 6 months after this all started happening, you started seeing millions of defaults and mortgages going belly up. And when you have investment vehicles that are worth billions and billions of dollars completely backed by mortgages that are dependent on people paying their mortgage, there could be a problem if the people don't pay the mortgage. Long story short, as you all know, the housing market collapsed and billions of dollars was virtually disappeared, completely destroyed, almost overnight with this housing collapse. These mortgage companies knew that there was a very good chance of these mortgages going belly up. They thought that they were actually going to be able to make the profit and get out prior to there actually being this collapse. They knew ultimately these people were going to go into foreclosure, but they were still trying to make profit quickly. The reason, back to my original point, the reason we need regulation within the banking industry, these big banks who were left to their own devices found a political loophole and were able to exploit millions of people. I know some of them personally that are actually now renting, that lost their homes, just to make a profit. And the majority of the people that are the heads of these banks didn't take much of a loss at all. It was just the companies that lost money, and which was ultimately American people's money. The method of our study, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be using or creating a regression model, it's called. You'll see all what that is later. And what I'm going to be doing is this model is going to measure the effects of different various bank attributes on the different performance indicators that I have. And we're using data that was gathered from the FDIC website. The purpose of this is to generate policy recommendations aimed at improving overall bank quality and performance while protecting bank clients. Now we'll move on to the data slide. The data that was actually used to compile this regression model and write this thesis was from the top 100 largest bank branches in terms of asset size from the FDIC. These branches are located all over the country and are range in sizes. You'll see on the next slide some of the actual size. It's numerical cross-section data, meaning it's all from one time frame. I believe it's from December 2009 it was from. in just very plain dollar amounts. And the reason this was done, the results are given in a linear relationship format to reduce risk of error. The reason that I chose this data set was its ability to give easily understood results and the fact that it's a good representation of the entire banking industry. I'm going to be making policy recommendations that are to be applied to the entire banking industry, so I wanted the data set to be as all-encompassing as I could be. This might be a little hard to see. These are the summary statistics for our data. It basically just goes over what the variable. Here you actually see our, come over here. You actually see on the top are our 4 dependent variables, and below that are our 19 different independent variables, which again are our different bank attributes, and the top are our 4 performance indicators. Just for the sake of time, I won't go over all of these numbers. Some of the numbers are given in scientific notation just because of how big they are. Okay, this is my actual empirical model. Okay. Again, the purpose of this model is to see the effectiveness or what different bank attributes affect the bank's performance and by how much it happens to affect it. On the left-hand side, you have our dependent variable. In this case, it's our efficiency ratio, and followed by that are the 19 or in the 16 dependent variables. The different variables are, starting with beta 1, it's total employees, total assets, total securities, total trading account assets, total liabilities, total deposits, total percent of those deposits insured, total bank equity capital, total earning assets, total volatile liabilities, total risk-weighted assets, total derivative operations. Beta 13x, you'll explain that in a second, that's a subgroup of income and expense variables, total service charges, a bank charge, and then total securities gains and net income attributable to bank. The log that you see is, it takes more or less a percentage relationship between the variables because the disparity in the, I guess, ranges of actual numbers is huge. Some of them go, you need scientific notation. Other ones, like the efficiency ratio, since it's a much smaller number, 0 to 100 usually, to get a more accurate result and actually show how much these 19 individual independent variables affect our performance indicators, we take a percentage format or a log format, which gives a much more, again, just that a percentage format as opposed to just, oh, yeah. Okay, then again, beta 13x is a subgroup that contains total interest income, total interest expense, total non-interest income, and totally non-interest expense. Moving on, some of our key variables. Our main dependent variable is our efficiency ratio. This is defined as total cost over total revenue and is basically a measure of how efficient a bank uses its resources. And again, when I say bank, these are individual bank branches. So Chase could have, say, 3 or 4 different bank branches. This represents one of them. Total assets is just that, total assets in dollar amounts. Trading account assets, just because banks have been doing a lot of interbank trading, I was interested in that. Total liabilities and total deposits is more or less a measure of how much debt a bank has and how much money a bank has coming into it. And then percent of insured deposits. All deposits are insured by the FDIC up to 150 or 200,000, whatever it is now. But some bank branches actually deposit or insure a certain percentage of their own deposits, more or less as a way to improve customer service and all that fun stuff. And then again, beta 13x is just that subgroup of the investment and or interest and expense variables. Okay, these are our results. For the sheer sake of time, I will not go through all of those numbers. But the way this table or chart is set up, along the top column you have our 4 dependent variables, and then down the bottom are our 19 independent variables. And those regression results, I'll explain what they are and how you interpret them, just so you can explain. The dark bolded numbers are the actual regression results, or the relationships or coefficient relationships that you see between our dependent and independent variables, and directly below that in parentheses is the standard error for each one. The stars, or the asterisks, next to some of the regression results indicate significance levels. You can have anywhere between a 10, 5, or 1% significance level, and if you don't see a star, it means it's not statistically significant, and it's more or less the trend you see, so you can't really use it for any hard data.